I'd like to welcome you all to our first of 6 sessions on building a comprehensive nutritional program. So while this program is aimed at giving newer practitioners tools to develop their skills as clinical nutritionists, I would suggest that it also provides a great review of the fundamental tenets of patient care in a nutritional office. Now, originally this material was developed to be delivered in a 12-hour weekend seminar, but I'm going to deliver this in 6 one-hour webinars. Now, this technology is a little bit new to me, so I apologize in advance for any unforeseen technical errors. However, what it does allow us to do is record this material and provide it to you at a later date. So if today we do run over an hour and you're not capable of staying with us for more than an hour, we should have the remaining minutes available that you can listen to later at your leisure. So today I want to cover some history, some philosophy, and some practical avenues for you to explore on your own so that you can further your own nutritional knowledge. So the tools of the trade, where we really are going to be talking about in this course of webinars is, of course, whole food supplements. We're going to be talking about the system survey form. We're going to be talking about the nutritional exam, and to some degree, we're going to be talking about practice management. Today's topic, like I said, is mostly a little bit of historical and philosophy stuff, so I think it's a good foundation for which to start from. So talking about foundations, ultimately when I'm working with patients, I'm thinking about the core or the structure or the foundation of their being. So we can liken that to the foundation or structure of a house. So probably the most profound thing that I work with my patients is obviously their diet and their lifestyle. And the things that I'm thinking of as a practitioner from a foundational standpoint is how is their immune system? How is their digestive system, their glucose metabolism, their liver and gallbladder status? Do they have a mineral imbalance? How is their endocrine hormonal system functioning, and are they in need of purification? These are very basic structural foundational issues that I start with each and every patient. Now we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of that with future webinars, but understand that this is kind of where we're starting from a basis. So this information is not uniquely mine. This is information that has been passed down from multiple other practitioners. So when you look at this list, these are the shoulders that I am standing on. These are people that have come before and provided education to me and many others, and a lot of from what I'm drawing this information from today. So a definition that I think is very good is this functional medicine definition, which basically gets back to the basics or back to the patient's life story, back to the processes wherein disease originates, and definitely back to the desire of healthcare practitioners to make people well, not just manage their symptoms. Now, this can be a little confusing because one of the things that we're going to really spend a lot of time talking about in this course of webinars is the symptom survey, which may make you question, well, if we're not managing symptoms, why are we using a symptom survey? Because now we're basically just going back to symptom management. And I'd like to point out that I think it's more than that. The symptom survey is a tool. It gives us an opportunity to look at those symptoms because those symptoms are very real. They're very important to our patients. They give us a means of looking into them past that symptom, into systems, into foundations, into the framework of what may be currently driving that illness pattern or that pain or that problem that they've come to meet us for. So today we want to focus not so much on the nuts and bolts of the symptom survey, but really on our philosophy, really on our history and our understanding of why we do the things that we do with our patients. So I'm looking at a holism. I'm looking at in this case, the earth as a whole as the source for our being, as the source for our foundation and our nourishment. as opposed to looking at a fractionated or isolated component to providing what we really want to do, which is to restore optimal health and vitality. So I think it's pretty common knowledge that as a nation, we are overfed but malnourished. And recently, there's a fairly substantial study from McCants and Widdowson that shows that due to the depletion of our foods and various other things, they've come to the conclusion that the overweight are just as malnourished as the starving, and the nutritional programs to target, we should really be targeting, obesity just as much as we should be malnutrition. In fact, they've gone so far as to suggest that we need a new definition of malnutrition because food availability is not the issue. It's the quality of the food that's the problem. So they're calling this new type of malnutrition type B malnutrition. So they never really define type A, but I assume type A malnutrition would be the person who is literally starving to death, is not getting enough food. However, we know that most people, particularly in the United States, are getting more than plenty of the energy creating components of food, but are still malnourished. So what's driving this? What are the causes of this type B malnutrition? So when we look at this study, it gives us some insight into what they believe is causing it. And so the first thing that they suggest is causing it is that we're favoring varieties of crops and animal breeds for their presentation rather than their nutritional quality. So that leads us to a brief sideline, a brief topic on a fellow by the name of Norman Borlaug. Now this guy is one of the most highly decorated people of all time. He's got congressional medals of honor, and in India and the US he received the Nobel Prize. Basically he's noted as the man who fed 1 billion people. And it was his work in agronomy that basically created this hybridized strain of wheat, which was remarkable at feeding the type A malnourished. However, the problem with that is that we're favoring this presentation of wheat for really nourishing these people. So while they have plenty of caloric intake, they're still not getting the nourishment they need. So for those of you that have a little bit of interest in the idea of moving too much towards a staple food diet, which is a lot of what we're doing, most of the products in our grocery stores are wheat-based. If we want to not relive the potato famine, we need to move away from these favorings of crops and animals that are bred merely for their presentation or their yield and not for their nutritional quality. The other thing that we are seeing is an increased use of fertilizers that do not contain any trace elements, just those that contain nitrogen and potassium and phosphorus. And in addition to just using those fertilizers, that leads to inevitable soil depletions. Continuous crop growing and overuse is damaging the fungus and relationship between the roots and the fungus that help that plant basically liberate or assimilate those nutrients from the soil. Now, inherently, some soils are just deficient or lacking in those parent materials that provide for those foods. So obviously certain foods grow in certain areas because certain soils have certain things that others don't. So are we paying attention to, are we growing the proper foods in the proper fields at the proper time? Other things that have led to this type B malnutrition has been things like the increased transport distance and storage times and storage methods for supposedly fresh produce. Other factors contributing to our growing ill health is the fact that most of us are leading more stressful lives, more commutes, more paperwork, more things of that nature. And as a result, we're reaching for more stimulants, more Red Bull and 5-hour energy. There's a Starbucks on every corner. And most of us, or many of our patients, are using lots of medications. So when we increase the detoxifying burden of these medications and these things that we're doing to manage our stress, albeit maybe not appropriately, we're putting more burden on the need for our body to have more nutrients. Of course, there's a lot of things burdening our detoxification pathways, including polluted air and polluted water. Obviously, our sedentary lifestyle and our lack of sunlight. And probably most importantly is kind of the overarching trend towards more refined, poor quality, high carbohydrate, low micronutrient foods and processed foods. So what a dilemma we have found ourselves in. Basically, that's the sum up of this study. If you read further into this, it says, oh, where is it at? Something about, here we go, right here. It says, yet we continue to see the relentless pursuit of farming and marketing practices that emphasize cheapness and durability over quality to the point where the past few generations have become conditioned to accept this as the norm. So the thing that I would ask you to question and think about is those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. So I'm going to show you a quote from 3 generations ago. 3 generations ago, a person said, because of the denaturation of foods, by refining and processing, we are overeating the fattening and energy-producing components and literally starving for the vital vitamin and mineral factors in foods, no less necessary to life than the fats, carbohydrates, and proteins, which have become far scarcer and more difficult to obtain than at any time in the history of the human race. Actually, our diets are excessively rich in the fuels necessary for good health, but lack the spark in the form of vitamins and minerals necessary to properly utilize them. Again, 1942, 3 generations ago, this was already being told. Who was saying it? Perhaps one of the smartest men of that time, Dr. Royal Lee. So I'm going to play a recording of what Dr. Royal Lee had to say.
One of the tragedies of human civilization is the precedence of chemical therapy over nutrition. It's a substitution of artificial therapy over natural, of poisons over food, in which we are feeding people poisons, trying to correct the reactions of starvation. You all know how ridiculous that is, but you all know how widely it's being done.
How widely it's being done. This is 70 years ago. But if you look at that quote and you look at the conclusion of that study, you can see that they're basically saying the exact same things. Royal Lee was remarkably ahead of his time. So let's spend a minute and talk about Royal Lee. Royal Lee, he's the kind of guy that could not get enough physics in high school. So he went to his high school principal and said, I would really like an advanced physics course. Of course, the school had no means for teaching an advanced physics course. So his principal asked him to teach it. I think when I was in high school, the only thing my principal asked me to do was maybe tie my shoes. Royal Lee was, as many of you probably know, he was a dentist, but I don't think, as far as I'm aware, maybe Joseph can correct me, but I don't think he ever actually practiced. I think his real desire was in tinkering and in learning about things, and I think his passion lie in engineering and in nutrition. So it was his passion for engineering and tinkering with dental drills and motors and things like that that led him to dental school, because he thought, what better way to make a better dental drill than to think like a dentist? So that's what drove him to dental school. Of course, he served in World War I. This was after World War I. He went into to dental school. And then he started the Lee Engineering Company, and it was at that time that he developed some regulators and some governors for motors that controlled the RPMs, which was really remarkable for him because it afforded him the opportunity to work where his passion lie, which was in nutrition. So I don't want to I could spend hours talking about Royal Lee, but I think what I'll rather do is just point you in the direction of a place where you can get more information if you want it. There's a great book about Royal Lee and the history of standard process, and you can get this book from Saline River Press. And later in the presentation, I have a link to that. So for more information on Royal Lee and the things that he did prior to standard process, a great book is celebrating 75 years. So let's look at Lee's tenet. His overarching idea that whole food nutrition begins with sun and water and fertile soil. So here's a picture of beets growing on the standard process fields. And the thing that makes standard process unique and amazing is they grow all their own food, or virtually all of it. And I could talk about certified organic and Moses standings and things like that. I think it's fair to say that there is no greater organic standard than the farms at Standard Process. So I had the benefit of touring the farms back in 2004, and I was pretty impressed and amazed at how things were doing then. And the next few slides I really just added in the last couple of days because I thought they were so amazing. I had to put them on here and read them because if you haven't been to the farms and you don't know what's happening, you don't get to see it. So the idea here is that soil is probably the strongest asset that Standard Process has. So if we go back to that holism, where are we getting this food and this nutrition from? Well, we're getting it from the sun, we're getting it from water, and we're getting it from the soil. So food cannot possibly be more nutrient dense than the soil in which it was grown. So the soil testing that's happening at Standard Process right now is showing amazing yields without robbing organic matter or cation exchange capacity. So basically they're determining that they're completely sustainable. Now, things that they've added in the past few years is this ability to use global positioning. So they're using global positioning systems to pinpoint the areas of their farm and their field where they may be having nutrient balance problems or issues, and they're able to fix those areas that need it. This is pretty amazing. The other thing that doesn't sound like a farm issue, but it really is next year the farm will be able to store a capacity of 14,000 gallons of raw vegetable juice versus 2,400. That's a huge increase. It's ginormous. But why is that important? Is it important because it makes it easier, or is it important because it makes it better? So what this increased capacity will do is it will ensure that they can harvest everything they need to harvest at its most opportune, most critical time. So let me explain that. Let me get that straight. So if I've got a field full of carrots and their optimum ripeness, their optimum nutritional value is on day 65, and I've got 10,000 gallons worth of carrot juice due on that day, I would have had to split it up over several days if I only had 2,400 gallons capacity. But now that they've increased that capacity, they can harvest more food more optimally at the right time, process it, and quickly put it into a more nourishing tablet for our patients. This is impressive. So they continually improve and expand their field equipment. This year is the first year they're going to have an automated front-mounted weed puller. They've had weed pullers in the past, but apparently this one's a little bit more fancy. And I've got a slide in a second. I'm going to send you to, you can see some things that are pretty impressive. They're going to start triple cleaning their seeds to ensure that their products that are gluten-free are gluten-free. This is news to me. I don't know what this means, and I'm bringing it to you hot off the press. So understand that they're paying attention at the farm. They are not doing business as usual. They're continuing to grow and continuing to provide an even better product. So in the past 2 years, the farm has seen improvements in soil structure due to the inclusion of compost that was managed and cultivated on site. So basically what they're saying is we're using our own compost. And since our own compost is the most organic, awesome compost in the world, our fields are just getting better and better. So let's talk a little bit about their research. So the interesting thing is that what they're really trying to do now is they're trying to determine when's the best time to harvest. Can we get more nutrient density determine on which day we harvest? When is the plant most ripe, most available for its plucking? So what they're doing is they're studying these facets, including soil conditions and planting dates and cover crops and all this, and they're determining where and what and how is the best time to create and cultivate these foods that they're using in our products. So an example of work on the farm is a recently published study in the Journal of Herbs, Spices, and Medicinal Plants, and that's examining this phytonutrient content, in this case of buckwheat, and estimating its optimal harvest stage. Now, that's why it's important that they have more capacity to hold more juice. If they can hold more juice, they can harvest more things on the optimal day. So the thing that this study is telling us is that the minerals in buckwheat can be as much as 48 to 57% different for potassium or magnesium depending on the type of the soil or when it's harvested. So you can rest assured that they're taking great pains to make sure they know exactly what's in their soil and how it's affecting their food. And that's affecting their product, which is affecting our patients. So uh, they're also researching not only just the optimal time, but the different strains of the different types. So there's obviously different types of radishes and different types of carrots and different types of kale and things of that nature. So again, they're always looking at what can we do to provide the most optimal nutrient delivery system available. So for those of you that have not done a tour and don't have any plans to make it to Palmyra, to do a tour, you should do at least yourself a favor and go to the Standard Process website. And I've made a picture of what the website looks like. And if you go under that tab that says organic farming, there's a few YouTube videos on that front end weed puller and some of the other practices that they're doing at the farm, in addition to some of those studies that we just mentioned. Because these are really worth watching. If you've never seen an amazing organic farm at work, you should see this. So this passion for producing the best quality product did not end with Royal Lee. It continues today, and it shows in the products, and it shows in our patients' improvement. So one other thing I learned was that in the past 2 years, SP has advanced their drying technology with a brand new belt drying system. So this took a system that was a minute long and made it a 3-hour process. Why? Because it was better for the food. It altered the constituents of the food less. And this previous drying system took one guy. The new one takes 6 guys. They're increasing their workforce and their efficiency at the expense of providing the highest quality food supplements. This is why I use Standard Process. Nobody provides a better food delivery system than this company. So when I look out my window at my office, it looks not too dissimilar from this. I live in Paradise Valley. This is Montana. And my ecosystem, my environment is amazing. It's beautiful in its wholeness. I don't like it for the flowers. I don't like it for the trees. I don't like it for the mountains. I like it for everything that it provides. So this is a segue or a window for me to start talking about what we're doing with healthcare these days. So first, let's talk about drugs. Here's a great, huge definition of drugs, but let's narrow it down. It's a substance other than food. So you'll notice this image down at the bottom. It's kind of yellowed. That is the exact same image as this right here, but it's in no way near the same. It's a substance other than food. Whereas a nutraceutical is a product that is isolated or purified from food. So again, let's just take that sky and it's not quite the same, and it's a different color, but we'll take that and we'll give you lots of it. That's a nutraceutical. Versus the definition of nutrition, which is the process of nourishing or being nourished, especially the process by which a living organism assimilates food and uses it for growth and for replacement of tissues. So remember, assimilate, that's important. The science or the study that deals with food and nourishment, especially in humans, and a source of nourishment or food. So there's really 2 points of view. There's the first point of view that vitamins, factors, parts can be synthesized and manufactured in chemically pure and isolated form, high concentration and high potency. So again, here's just those little image of flowers. Let's give you 10,000 of those and see how that works on your sciatica. Or the other point of view that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. That vitamins are extremely complex groups of associated substances of a synergistic nature, and if taken apart, cannot operate in their intended organized and functional manner. No matter how hard that patch of flowers tries, it cannot be the full environment that I see from my back window. So one of the analogies, and I really highly recommend that you use analogies and metaphors with your patients, because I think that's the best way to communicate. People understand a story. Roy Lee's story that he used, his analogy that he used with his patients, was that of the pocket watch. And the pocket watch was great because it paints such an excellent picture of what a vitamin complex is like. So he would say, if you give me your pocket watch, and I take a hammer to your pocket watch and I smash it into a million bits, but I'm very careful, and I take every single molecule of that watch that I just demolished, and I package it up into a nice envelope, and I hand it back to you, and you're looking at me befuddled and with disbelief, and I say, what's the matter? I'm giving you back every single thing you gave me. Well, the fact of the matter is it has lost its function. It's no longer in context. It's out of its balance. It's no longer the same thing. To believe that we can nourish people with isolated, fractionated vitamin supplements is that exact same view. It's folly. So I'm here to tell you that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. This is whole food philosophy. There's a synergistic function that if we remove even one part of that watch, it will fail to work. Now that doesn't preclude my ability to want to study that watch, look at all the parts, understand what's in there. And we do that. We've done that. When we look at carrots, we know that there are dozens of ingredient or whatever phytonutrients that are in a carrot, of which one is beta carotene. But we hear about beta carotene all the time, and we hear very little about every single other thing. Why talk about beta carotene when we should really be talking about carrots and the food and the quality of the soil that we're getting it from? Well, that's boring. Patients don't want to hear that. They might a little bit. They might smile, but the fact of the matter is I feel confident when I give them cattle, and I know that I'm giving them food from the highest quality soil in North America, and I'm nourishing them. More on that later. So, of course, we've also looked at broccoli, and there's plenty of things in broccoli besides just what's topical in the news. Well, 2 or 3 years ago, all the fad was sulforaphane and how amazing it was for phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification pathways. And when we did all the studying and we really got down to it, what did we find? It doesn't work. But if you eat broccoli or if you eat cruciferous vegetables, what happens? It works. So again, you need to stop seeing the forest start seeing the forest for the trees. So let's go back to another clip of Roy Lee to see what he has to say on the topic.
Use of single factors outside of the food pattern, I don't believe is nutritional. It's pharmacological. It's a drug effect. We've taken that stand from the beginning. And all of the tests that have been made on synthetic vitamins have failed to show any nutritional value. So if we're not interested in drugs, we shouldn't be interested in them.
So if we're not interested in drugs, we shouldn't be interested in them. I think that's fabulous. So let's go back to Royal Lee's day and kind of look at the chemistry of the day. And there was a fellow by the name of Ehrenfried Pfeiffer, and he was important because he was one of the first to perfect a method of looking at the constituent parts of a object, a plant, or virtually anything. And so what he developed was this means of what we called paper chromatography. And was great because it gave us probably our first opportunity to tell the difference between what we were isolating in the lab, ascorbic acid, versus what was naturally occurring in the plant. So many of you have probably seen these, paper chromatography images before, and I don't think they hold as much value as they once did. But the fact of the matter is they're a great graphic representation of the difference between a wholesome food and a synthesized food. So though I'm not the biggest fan of eating grain, even wholesome whole grain has a substantially better pattern or profile than that which has been processed. So technology's changed with regards to how we've we look at these chromatograms. So now we're no longer using paper. We're using vast million-dollar machines called gas chromatograms and high-powered liquid chromatography that give us etchings and images that tell us what's in the foods that we're eating. So there's certainly benefit in these things because they can tell us the quality of the food that we're getting. And I think I'll take a minute to talk a little bit about MediHerb because some of you may not be familiar with MediHerb or where they stand and how it works and all that stuff. MediHerb is an Australian company, and they partnered with Standard Process to be their distributor in the United States. And the reason that this is a marriage made in heaven is because MediHerb pays particular attention to delivering their herbs whole. So they're capable of delivering that herb, no matter how concentrated it is, in the form in which it was found as the whole herb. So the disadvantage that MediHerb has that Standard Process doesn't is MediHerb doesn't have farms that can grow all the herbs that they need because these herbs are growing all over the world. Because you just can't grow Siberian ginseng in, I don't know, Australia. That's grown in a more Siberian environment. So what do? They have to go around the world and source their herbs. And in order to make sure that they're getting the right herb and not ditchweed, is they have to run it through these tests, this thin layer chromatography and HPLC and all the fancy stuff, to make sure that the constituents in that herb are consistent with the constituents that are found in a whole plant of that herb that's the exact species and the exact variety of what we want, so we can assure the quality. Now, for those of you that don't understand or don't know a lot about MediHerb, I'm going to make it simple. MediHerb can deliver more herb in a tablet than virtually any other company on the planet. So some of you may understand this. There's a program on your computer that's called a zip file. So you can take an enormous file and you can condense it down into a really small size so that it's easier and quicker to send over the internet by email or whatever. The thing that MediHerb has done that virtually no other company can do is they can zip their herb into a really small package. So they can take an enormous amount of herb and deliver it in a smaller package. So when you look at the price of some of the MediHerb products, you see that it's, some of the products are expensive. The fact of the matter is, the reason they're expensive is because they're delivering you an amazing amount of herb in a very small package. Maybe in one of the future webinars, I'll spend a little bit of time on how I explain that to my patients on determining the cost differential analysis between a store-bought herb and a MediHerb herb, and how, in order to be equivalent, they'd have to buy about 6 or 10 or 12 bottles of that over-the-counter variety herb to even come close to the concentration of what they're getting from a MediHerb product, and why it's vastly more economically feasible to work work with Mediurb. Anyway, that was an aside. Back to the story of this guy. This guy, Dr. Georgi, he was awarded the Nobel Prize because he was the guy that first isolated ascorbic acid. This guy. Now the problem is they gave him the Nobel Prize, but shortly before that he wrote a paper that said, "Listen, guys, I'm not sure this is right." But they gave it to him anyway. So here's a blippet from the book that he wrote 2 years after winning the Nobel Prize. He said, I got a letter from a colleague of mine who was suffering from a hemorrhagic diathesis, which basically means a bleeding disorder. So he wanted to try ascorbic acid in his condition, but possessing none at that time of sufficient quantities of ascorbic acid, I sent him a preparation of paprika that I knew to contain a whole lot of ascorbic acid, and the man was cured by it. So later, with his friend, St. Rosniak, they tried to produce the same therapeutic effect, but they couldn't do it with ascorbic acid. So basically what he was saying was, guys, this ascorbic acid is not really what fixes scurvy. So we can look at vitamin C just kind of as a graphic representation. We can look at it and see that it has perhaps more than just ascorbic acid, this outside little shell, but that there are factors such as organic copper and ascorbigen and bioflavonoids and the P and J factors, things that we'll perhaps cover in a later class. But recognize that this is more than one thing. This is a fancy watch. It has quite a bit of moving parts and things that are more than just the shell. So with regards to bioavailability, here's a study that shows basically that when you give ascorbic acid by itself, or you give ascorbic acid in a food complex like some citrus extract, that those that are given the citrus extract absorb that ascorbic acid more effectively or more efficiently. I don't know that that makes a difference to me. I don't care that ascorbic acid was absorbed more effectively. What I do know is the right food given at the right time to the right person is going to keep them nourished and prevent disease. So another kind of sentinel study was this from the American Heart and Lung Association. This was back in the year 2000. And the title of the article says a lot. It says vitamin C supplementation intake and progression of carotid artery atherosclerosis. So right away it's got my attention because it's telling me that vitamin C may be causing my carotid arteries to plug up. So the long and short of it was that men who took 500 milligrams of ascorbic acid every day had an increase in the progression of the size of the inside of their carotid arteries. So even men with no evidence of thickening at baseline who are regularly supplement users had an increase in the intima over the 18 months of the study. Further, the guy in charge of the study, Dr. Dwyer, was quoted as saying, when you extract one component of a food and give it at a very high level, you just don't know what you're doing to the system, and it may be adverse. Sounds a whole lot like what Royal Lee said 3 centuries ago. We're giving a drug effect. And if we're not interested in drugs, well, I shouldn't be interested in that. So here's what I understand. What I understand is if I eat food, if I eat natural whole vitamin C from a product like Catalin or a product like Cataplex AC or Cataplex C, I will not be doing damage to the inside of my arteries. However, if I'm taking an ascorbic acid product, if I'm doing an Emergent C, if I'm doing any of these high dose ascorbic acid products, I'm putting myself at risk for increased endothelial damage. That's horrific. So this is not my information. I didn't bring all this up. This is stuff that I stole from Mark Anderson. So those of you that really find this information fascinating and you want to learn more about the iatrogenic effects of vitamin E, or in this case, not alpha tocopherol, or vitamin C, or the other things like folic acid, things of that nature. This is from Back to School for Doctors 2000. So this is also available through Standard Process West and Saline River Press. So we could talk about this even more, but I want to move on to Catalin, because Catalin is a great place to start for people that are new to Standard Process. Catalin is the flagship. It's the oldest product. It was virtually the only product that Dr. Lee thought he was ever going to make. So he created it as his goal was to make this one supplement that would rule them all, one ring to rule them all. And virtually most clinicians start with Catalin as their default protocol for giving to anybody, because you can't fail, because it's got everything. So Catalin was introduced in 1929. It's a multivitamin, mineral, and trace mineral supplement derived from 14 whole foods. It's a catalyst for many protocols, and virtually it's good for everybody that has a pulse. Recently, Standard Process has just delivered a gluten-free alternative. So for those practitioners like myself who are very aware of how grain and different food allergies are affecting the outcomes in our patients, this is an excellent product to have in our tool belt when we want to use something that's going to cover a lot of nutritional bases but not be driving any inflammatory processes through gluten intolerance. So if we look at Catalin, you can see that it comes with 14 different foods, and actually there may be more on this list, but let's go through these and kind of talk about them one at a time. So first of all, we already talked about carrots a little bit. Carrot powder was in there primarily as a source of vitamin A, amongst the dozens of other known and unknown factors that come with carrots. It was also a big source of alfalfa juice is our next topic, and basically that's where we're getting a big potassium dose. But the problem with potassium, and we know that inorganic potassium will drive adrenal function. And when you drive that inorganic potassium drives adrenal function, you start looking like alfalfa here on the top. And so alfalfa juice was given because Royal Lee knew that he could modulate adrenal function, and he could give a great source of a trace mineral through alfalfa. Also super good for vitamin K. The next thing that's in Catalin is pea vine. Now pea vine is basically there for manganese, as well as the other elements and factors that are unique to pea, but also because it's a high vitamin E product. Now, vitamin E is another one that deserves a little bit of consideration. So let's talk about it briefly, because a lot of people, a lot of my patients, when they come to me, they're taking some form of synthetic vitamin E. So again, the vitamin E is a complex. It's not one thing. And this is another graphic representation of what vitamin E might look like. So it has a shell of different tocopherols and different factors. And you'll notice that it's built around a central mineral. So vitamin E's central mineral is selenium. Now earlier we learned that vitamin C's central mineral was copper. And for those of you that see a lot of pernicious anemia or B12 deficiency, B12 is built around a central mineral of cobalt. So again, these are not isolated fractionated units. These are functional watches. They've got lots of pieces, parts that work together as a functional unit. So the problem with vitamin E is that we sort of recognize when I say we, I mean the FDA. The FDA recognizes vitamin E as basically alpha tocopherol, or the tocopherols themselves. Now, there are also tocotrienols, which you'll notice in my graphic representation aren't even on here. So there are tocotrienols. And the fact of the matter is this says there's 8 known forms. There could be 12. We know there's at least 4 tocotrienols. There could be 6. There could be 12. We don't know. But we know that we don't know. all the full activity of what these things do on a cellular biological level. But what I do know is that those tocopherols are highly oxidizable, which means they have terrible shelf life. So in order to make that a viable product, after they've isolated and fractionated it, they have to esterify it. So an ester, what's an ester? That's not an ester, that's an ester. An ester is a chemical bond that basically binds a carrier molecule, particularly a fatty acid or a polar molecule, which is why mostly the fat soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K are bonded in an ester fashion. But you can do it with the water solubles. So some of you have probably heard of ester C. So ester C is just a chemical means of bonding ascorbic acid to a larger molecule to prevent it from being oxidized. Now, the thing is that we can avoid that oxidation in the first place by simply eating it from the foods that it came in. It's naturally chelated. It's naturally not esterified, but chelated to a protein in the foods that we eat. So an esterified form of vitamin E in a gelatin capsule will be labeled as D-alpha tocopherol acetate. So when you see that acetate, that tells me that this is an esterified form and it's likely a liquid form. If it's a tableted form, so it means it's a solid form, it's going to be esterified or ester bonded to a succinate molecule. So anytime I'm reading a bottle from a patient that brings in their supplements, because I often request that they bring in their supplements so I can look at what they're taking, and I see that, I say, oh, I see that you have a synthesized version of vitamin E. That's probably not where you want to be if we're going to try to actually nourish you. So just for fun, we can look at some things from the National Academy of Sciences. So they said that gamma tocopherol is the predominant tocopherol in natural oils. And it is gamma tocopherol that is being reevaluated for its role in human nutrition and disease prevention. In a more recent study, the National Academy of Science has found that gamma tocopherol plays a critical role in defense against cancer and cardiovascular disease, blah, 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 blah. I don't give a crap. The fact of the matter is if we're only giving alpha, or if we're only giving gamma, or if we're only giving mixed tocopherols, we're still not paying attention to what our history is telling us. Eat the food. Go back to the soil. Back to catalin. Next ingredient in catalin is calcium lactate. So I don't want anybody to be confused about calcium lactate. Calcium lactate is basically a non-dairy, it's beet-derived source of calcium. The next thing in catalin is soybean lecithin. Again, yes, this is derived from soybean, but it doesn't have the genistein, it doesn't have the hormonal factors that too much soy in one's diet can cause. This is basically focusing on the phosphatidylcholine component that's in soy. Phosphatidylcholine, as you can see from the text on this slide, it's a major component of lecithin. That in some contexts the terms are used synonymously. So you can basically, when I'm looking at soybean lecithin or choline, which is another standard process product, I'm virtually looking at very similar things. Perhaps synonymous, maybe the exact same thing. What are these important for? Why did Roy Lee put this in here? Because he knew it had something to do with cell membrane integrity. Now, if we look at today's knowledge base, we know that it has a role in structural integrity, signaling roles for cell membranes, cholinergic neurotransmission. So we knew about that in the 40s. We knew acetylcholine, we knew norepinephrine, we knew epinephrine. So choline and phosphatidylcholine is a major component in nerve transmission. So right there, catalin is supporting nervous system and cellular membrane function. It contains nutritional yeast. Nutritional yeast is easy. This is brewer's yeast. It's attenuated, so what that means is it's killed, it's dead, it's no longer viable, so it's not going to cause any problems with patients that have yeast infections or other overgrowths or problems of that nature. This is in here for one purpose, to provide the best quality B vitamins going. Without B vitamins, we do not make ATP. This is the Krebs cycle down here. Those of you that made it through biochemistry remember that guy. If we do not have FADH, NADH, and TPP, we don't run Krebs cycle. That is thiamine, riboflavin, and niacin. Where do we get those guys? Nutritional yeast. Why is that important? Because the heart needs lots of ATP. That baby never stops, not till you're dead. Every day, every week, every minute, every hour, you're burning ATP. So nutritional yeast and rice bran are there to provide the B vitamins so that we can have ATP to run cellular function. Now, there's a host of animal products in Catalan because Dr. Lee knew that this is the primary source of where we get our nutrition. He read the works of Weston Price. These guys were contemporaries. They knew that you can't get everything from plants. So I had a little story today about vitamin C and how we derived it and learned how the Inuits didn't get scurvy and things like that. You can get that from this book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. So what Royal Lee knew was the first organ to fail in most people was the adrenal glands. And so he figured, I'm going to give them adrenal glands so that they can be nourished because that's the most important system. And we knew that the adrenal glands were huge sources of vitamin C. So that's a little bit on the nutrition and physical degeneration with the Inuit and their vitamin C. For time constraints, I'll skip that, but it's in the book. So the other thing that's in there is obviously kidney. Kidney is an enormously powerful animal source of vitamin A, not a carotene, not a carotenoid, but the animal source of vitamin A, more powerful, better delivery system. Huge supplier of iron, B12, and biotin. There are no, repeat, no plant sources of B12. So adrenal, spleen, liver powder, desiccated kidney are in there to provide wholesome, whole food, naturally occurring B12, which again is built around that central uh, molecule of cobalt. Next thing is spleen. So spleen is interesting because, why on earth would he put spleen in there? Spleen is, well, I think if I was to think like Roy Lee, I'd think, you know what? I know that the spleen is basically the largest lymph node in the body. It's a blood filter, and it's where we send our white blood cells to get their education so that they can become B cells and become more effective immune modulators. So I think he was putting it in there because he knew it would affect immune modulation and upregulate how our lymphatic system works. Now, I put this little thing on the slide that shows some studies about some stuff called thymopentin and splenopentin as immune modulators. So the reason I put this in here is it's kind of interesting because it talks about adding bovine splinin and things like this. Basically, these are little cofactors and factors that are found in the spleen and the thymus that derive our immune modulatory effects. So Roy Lee would have obviously not had any idea about thymopentin and splenopentin, but these are things that are probably being provided because we're providing the entire organ. It has it in there. That's why we're delivering it. Liver. Liver powder is pretty self-explanatory. That is the biggest animal source of nutrition available. And probably the commonest thing that my patients say is, "Ooh, aren't livers the filters? And don't they get all gunked up?" And I said, "Well, I don't see a whole lot of cows smoking cigarettes and doing meth. I don't see them eating ho-hos and Twinkies. They're pretty much grass burners. So I think their livers are big nutrient centers and not big garbage bombs like most humans." So obviously liver because it's providing a lot of nutrition. Secondarily, because I think when we support the liver, we're supporting not only the nutrition, but we're supporting the immune system, and we're supporting detoxification pathways. And with our environment, with its increased toxicity, we need to drive those detoxification pathways even more effectively. The second and more important, maybe not more important, but definitely you want to be doubly important when you're talking about fertility is wheat germ. So wheat germ is supplied for its vitamin E, and vitamin E is really based the reason why it's a vitamin is, so when we think of ascorbic acid is what prevents scurvy. Vitamin E, or the tocopherols, are what prevents abortion, what prevents miscarriage. So wheat germ is in there to drive fertility, both male and female. So when we look at the studies of vitamin E from pre-1950s, 1940s, 1930s, when they were using vitamin E in those studies, they were using wheat germ oil. They were not giving fractionated alpha tocopherol succinate. They were giving wheat germ oil. And finally, mushroom powder. So one of the things that Royal Lee knew was that mushroom powder was very high in tyrosinase, which is kind of that organic copper molecule that makes the the pocket watch the pocket watch. So I think most watchmakers would say the mainspring is the most important part of the watch. That tyrosinase is arguably the most important part of that whole molecule, which isn't to say removing it and giving it in high dosages by itself is important, would be the panacea, but this is what we want to do. So the next thing I'd like to spend a minute talking about is fish oil. So fish oil, or in this case, standard process is tuna omega-3. And we've got a new fish oil coming out with the cod liver, and we've got other omega-3 oils, but tuna omega is a great source of the essential fatty acids, particularly DHA and EPA. So obviously there's a lot of attention around this. We hear a lot about it with regards to its ability to fight inflammation and arthritis and Alzheimer's, and that, we know that it's a polyunsaturated fat. The thing that we may not be aware of is that, the DHA component is very important, and when we're talking about in natural terms and how the body utilizes it, we really like to see that ratio in a 5-to-1. So DHA to EPA is an important ratio, and that's where it occurs in tuna omega is in exactly the same proportion as it occurs in the human. So I think for general purposes, the best all-around omega-3 delivery system that we have is tuna omega. So what's so special about our tuna oil? Well, what is special about standard processes tuna oil is obviously they're not growing it in the fields in Palmyra, but they are deriving it from tuna fished from the South Pacific. Every batch is tested for PCBs, mercuries, and peroxides. It helps to balance the intake of omega-3s and omega-6s, and obviously it's working to strengthen cellular membranes and improve cellular permeability, and that those omega-3s are critical in the production of prostaglandins. I think most of us understand that. So tuna oil is a great place to start with all of our patients to provide that omega-3 benefit that we're looking for them. So my rule of thumb with my patients is everybody on the planet should be taking an omega-3 oil. I don't care if it's tuna, I don't care if it's cod liver, I don't care if it's lionum B6 or flaxseed oil, but they need to be getting some omega-3s in, unless, if my patient says, I eat cold water fish, not farmed, but wild cold water fish 3 or 4 times a week, then I think they're okay. They probably don't need it. But if they're not, because I don't have a whole lot of patients that are doing that, I can't encourage tuna or some other omega-3 oil nearly enough. Finally, the last thing I want to talk about briefly with regards to products today is trace minerals B12. Trace minerals B12, again, we talked about alfalfa and how it had the non-adrenal stimulatory potassium. There is quite a bit of alfalfa in trace minerals, but the main thing that's in trace minerals is kelp. And kelp is teeming with lots of good things, particularly, in my opinion, iodine, but also folate, magnesium, phosphorus, a lot of sulfur compounds. And the reason that Royal Lee chose that is because he knew that there was a higher mineral content of some of the foods that come from the ocean. So again, kelp is not grown in the fields in Palmyra, but it was sourced because it is such a high nutrient density, particularly with this, in this case, with minerals. So it's also a great source of chlorophyll, has naturally chelated minerals. It's one of the few vitamin D sources from a plant source, and it contains 25 different nutrients and more than 50 trace minerals. So you can see kind of a list of the trace minerals that are in the product. Of course, we have studies that show the benefit of different things like to help detoxify heavy metals. Of course, one of the main reasons I use it is for iodine. We have quite a bit of literature that suggests that iodine deficiency causes problems with regards to breast cancer, and I think that it has a role to do in a lot of female issues with regards to cervix and uterine problems as well. So with regards to the endocrine organs, of course, each of the hormonal organs need some minerals to function normally. So when we look at supplying a patient something like catalin and trace minerals and the tuna omega oil, we're doing a really good job of covering all of our bases with regards to vitamins and minerals and healthy oils. So there was a study in 2002 from the Harvard School of Medicine that basically just said, you know what, everybody could use a multivitamin. I don't care. Of course everybody could use a multivitamin. Everybody, well, everybody. So many people have type B malnutrition. Of course they need vitamins. They're suffering for them. But again, it's not the vitamin that's going to help them. It's the nourishing them that's going to help them. So if you did nothing else for your patients but give them the whole body support, which is this general health pack, which is basically built for those patients that are looking for an easier and more convenient way to nourish themselves. This is a great foundation in addition to the things that we'll be working on in future webinars, blood sugar and digestion and heart and nerve system support, connective tissue support. This is where we want to live. So I'd like to spend, I know we're about 3 minutes over and I've got about maybe 4 or 5 minutes worth of more material, so if you can hang in there, great. So this is the part where I wanted to just share a few things that I think new practitioners could really benefit in case they're just unaware. Here's a list of different books that I can't recommend enough that people get their hands on and start to learn from. So right here is probably my favorite book is the Clinical Reference Guide. It has all sorts of information on exams and exam forms and products, and it has some very cookbook protocols for what to do with gallbladder or this or that. So it's a great place to start while you're building your education on becoming a more proficient nutritional practitioner. So if we go old school, another book is called the Therapeutic Food Manual, which is, you might call it a cookbook of protocols for different you know, problems, but it's a great source of further information to kind of get an understanding of why we're doing the things we're doing with different disease processes or things of that nature. There is an herbal reference guide that's relatively new. So this is the equivalent of the standard process reference guide, but this one is built around the herbs of MediHerb. So another great place if you're interested in MediHerb and what it provides. This is a awesome, huge text with all kinds of things in it, particularly how to take a case history with regards to herbal treatments, how to dose, body systems index. So those two books, the clinical reference and the herbal reference guide, are priceless. Another book that I've been reading recently that I really like because it's basically how a practitioner looks at what he's using. So Wally Schmidt is one of the foremost applied kinesiology practitioners and a huge, fountainhead of knowledge with regards to clinical nutrition. So a great book to just kind of look into the insights of a great practitioner. For those that do not get enough endocrinology, that are really dealing with a lot of hormonal problems, particularly we tend to see a lot of female hormonal problems, getting a grasp on endocrinology is really important. And Practical Endocrinology by Henry Harrower, fantastic book, good bedtime reading, puts you right out. Here's another book that's great. It's from Royal Lee. He wrote several articles in a lot of the journals of the day, like Ladies' Home Magazine and things like that. This is a book that collected a lot of his columns from different publications. Great for patients, great for you to look at how Royal Lee was thinking back in the 40s. Similarly, Roy Lee also had a host of different lectures that he gave. So there is a book on some of the lectures that he gave. That's Lectures on Roy Lee. And finally, probably the most patient-friendly book is by Mary Frost. It's called Back to the Basics of Human Health. Again, this is a great book that will prime your patients on the understanding of whole food philosophy and whole food nutrition. So those are great places to start. If you need more while you're waiting for webinar number 2, this is where you go to. So some of the websites that I frequent and I think are important for everybody that's trying to grow their nutritional vocabulary. Of course, Saline River Press is where you can get those books that I just mentioned. Standard Process West is starting a new mentor site. And that will be under development in the next few weeks and should be up and live soon. I think you can go to that site and sign up, and as it becomes more available and there's more to it, then it'll start to develop. But basically, this is built around the mentor system that SP West is developing. Another place that I utilize is International Foundation for Nutrition and Health. That's their website. Dr. Roy Lee has a website, kind of a historical website with lots of information about him. Weston Price was another early nutritionist that espoused the benefits of eating whole food, and he has a web page at westonaprice.org. A couple of blogs that I enjoy are Gary Taubes and Mark's Daily Apple. When you go to the actual notes that are on my web page, you can click on these, and these will be links that will take you to those web pages. So if you actually, here's how you access my web page. So when you type in parkcountychiropractic.com, you'll come to a screen that looks like this, and you'll click on the practitioners tab, and the teleconference access will open up, and you'll click on that. And you can type in eat with a capital E and healthy with a capital H. And that will bring you to the page that will have all of the prior teleconference notes from the Montana Nutrition Collaboration and today's presentation, so you can have all this from there. And some upcoming educational opportunities. So again, once you open that up, you can click on this and it'll take you to the February calendar of events and upcoming seminars and some things about the Montana Nutrition Collaboration and the Mentoring the Mentors. So I see there's a few questions coming in from the chat window, and it says, did you say calcium lactate is derived from beets? Yes, that is my knowledge. It is derived from beets. It has nothing to do with milk or lactose. And the attenuation of nutritional yeast in cattle, and how is the yeast attenuated, and how does that affect the potency of the other nutrients in the nutritional yeast? I don't know. What I do know is that it's dead and can't grow, but it still retains its B vitamin value. Now, yeah, and Joseph just noted that it's made from sugar beets. And the compiled notes currently out of print per Saline River Press. Bummer. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. I know I went very quickly, and I'm happy to hang around and answer any questions. And our next session will be on understanding body systems in relationship to the symptom survey. And I'll hang around and answer questions as they roll in from the chat menu for a couple more minutes to make sure that I answered any questions. And I thank you for your comments. Thanks. Is there a date for the next webinar? The tentative date for the next webinar is well, today's the first Tuesday of February, March, April. So the first Tuesday of April would be April 2nd. So tentatively April 2nd. You're welcome, Paige.